was born on the very same day when Maoz was, start like this. When Maoz was born, I called up my brother in America, all of my siblings. I'm here for 35 years. All of my family was in America all the years. A year and a half ago, my sister came on Aliyah, so that's nice. But when Maoz was born in 2002, still all of my family was in the States. And we called up my brother, he lives in Muncie, in New Hampstead, and him and his wife, and they told us Mazel Tov. Now this was about afternoon in Israel, morning there. I spoke to him, spoke to his wife. Later that day, in the evening here, afternoon in America, my sister-in-law, a young woman with 2 small children, suddenly dropped dead from an aneurysm, out of the blue. And that was a very difficult thing for our family, obviously. And I went to America to be with him in the Shiva, and I came back for the Brit. I got back the same day as the Brit. In Israel, unlike in America, it's not uncommon to do a Brit in the afternoon. And so we made the Brit in the afternoon. I got back that morning from America, and we did the Brit. And we had a name for Maoz, for my wife's grandfather, but we felt the need to name him a name that more encompasses the feelings and what was going on in our personal life at that time with this very big tragedy that was on our family. And we settled on the name Maoz. Maoz, Hashem Maoz Chayai. Maoz is, you can translate it as a fortress. So what is a fortress? Is a place where you have all the strength, and you go out from there and you come back from there. The source of strength. This fortress is where all the stuff is. And then you go out, come back to the fortress, and we felt that Maoz's strength, we needed a source of strength. And so we called him Maoz, and we were hoped that he would be a source of strength for us throughout our life. And he has been. It was always very difficult for Maoz in school. In first grade, he had certain learning disabilities already then, and he learned to read, but it was not easy. You know, those things were difficult for him. In all of his years in school, he had to work hard to get through school. School was hard for him, but he did it. And you know, in America, people work very hard towards getting into I don't know, maybe today it's different. Now to get top places. But where I live, all the boys go away to dorms, almost all the boys. And some of these high schools for boys that our kids go to, where I'm coming from, are very, very hard to get into and very competitive. You know, it's like getting into, no one's going to get in Princeton, but like, we're talking about like 60 spots and 800 people trying to get into 60. So it's very, very difficult, and it's a problem. But he wanted to go to a specific high school in Dimona, and he set his sights on that. And already 7th, 8th grade, he worked very, very, very hard, and he did not get in. And he did not get in, not because he has learning disabilities, because they accept people with learning disabilities, but only a certain amount. You can't have more than this amount because the school can only handle that. But then, my wife, Arda, you know her, she knows how to push the right buttons, and she got him in. And he had an amazing high school experience, amazing friends, amazing place, but he had to work very, very hard. And he did it. In other words, he did everything he had to do. He passed, got the bakrut, matriculation, but it was not easy. But he did it. And then, after high school, he decided that he wants to go to a Hesder yeshiva, which is a yeshiva where it's a 5-year program. Part of the time they're learning, part of the time they're in there. And he wanted to go to a particular, you visit the yeshivas and then you decide. I wasn't involved in this entire process. In Israel, we give our kids a lot of independence. I think here we have, the kids have one thing. So I was not at all involved in this. He, on his own, decided where he wanted to go. And he wanted to go to this place, and he goes there because he liked the guys, because he liked the Rebbe's, because he liked the environment, the atmosphere there. And that's where he wanted to go. So he went there for a bechina, and they give him a test in the Gemara. And the Rebbe sees that he's very weak. He was very weak. And he tries to tell him gently that in this yeshiva, in this particular yeshiva, we're learning Gemara like all day and all night. And maybe it's not the best place for you. Like maybe you need a different kind of place. Because he saw he was very weak. The Maoz wanted to go there. So again, without consulting us, he didn't need Varda for this. He spoke to a guy who already lived, who's an older guy in the yeshiva, to speak on his behalf. And he pushed, and he got it. You know how it is. You push, you get it. This is his way. So he got in, but he knew that he was weak. So he went, and he asked different people to learn with him. So he asked his Rebbe to learn with him, and he asked older guys to learn with him, and he asked stronger guys in the shir to learn with him, and he had it himself all set up with older people learning with him. And this is how the learning got. And I heard this from all of them at the shiva, and it's all confirmed. You walk into the base medrash and open the Gemara. So Rusa would read the first line in the Gemara and explain it to him, and Maoz would say, "I did not understand that." You know mevin. So you explain it a second time. You know mevin. Third time. And you know mevin. Fourth time. Okay, then he understood it. Okay. Move to the next line of the Gemara. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. Okay, now I got it. Third line. Fourth line. Fifth line. Every line was like that. Every day was like that. And he came every day to base medrash, and he didn't understand. Every day he was a male. He worked very hard in the Torah. He worked hard to understand the Torah, and he did not give up. And that's how it continued the entire year. Started the second year, same thing. He was a male Torah mamash. Now he's not going to be giving shir in this yeshiva, but he was working very hard to understand the Gemara and to be learning as best he could. And he did not say, "Okay, it's not for me." He kept at it. Second year, same thing. Halfway through the second year, he started to get antsy, and he saw, and this he did discuss with me, that he wasn't giving 100. It was hard for him to give 100% to me. Because I feel I'm not learning 100%. So maybe this is the time to go to the army, because I'm not giving 100%. Now, in Hester yeshivas, the way it works is that in Israel in general in the army, there are 3 times a year that people are drafted into the army. It's March, August, November. Now, Hester yeshivas can choose between March and August. They want to choose, because it affects like when they come back to yeshiva at the end. So if you are drafting in March, you come back to the yeshiva for Elul, so it works out for them. Not that year, the following year and a half. But if you draft in August, then you only go back in Hanukkah time, so it messes up the winter time. But if you go in March, it messes up the summertime. So every yeshiva can choose if they want to go to the army in March or they want to go to the army in August. And the advantage of Hester, besides the fact that you learn in yeshiva before and after the army, you're in the army with your friends from yeshiva. So everyone in the army in your particular unit are all guys from yeshiva. They're all from guys. It's very, very different than being a from guy surrounded by non-from guys. The whole experience is completely different. And Maoz wanted to stay in the yeshiva. He wanted to be a part of the Hesder program, but right now it was very hard from the yeshiva. So he said, "I'll go now to the army." But now meant going in March, and in his particular yeshiva, they went in August. So you can do that, but you run a very big risk of possibly, and this is from his point of view, an absolute worst case scenario that he would never wish on his worst enemy. They might draft you into the tank corps, which is the worst as far as he was concerned, because he wanted to be infantry. So how do you avoid that? Because if you go into the army as a orphaned, meaning you're not with your home yeshiva that you're coming from, then they're going to put you in tanks. So he didn't want that. So what's the answer? What's the loophole? The loophole is the paratroopers. Because the paratroopers, no one yeshiva goes to, because the paratroopers you have to get into. You have to, it's called a gibush. I guess it's sort of like a tryouts. And so therefore, by the paratroopers, by Tzanchanim, they have a little of each yeshiva, and that's the thing. So that's what he did. The problem was, he missed whatever. He got into the paratroopers, no problem. Too much information to get to the point. So he gets to the paratroopers, and he figured, okay, I'm in the army now for a year and 7 months, which is the amount of time you're in the army if you're in Hesder. And then, after that, he can go back to his yeshiva. Or if he decides he doesn't want to, you can always choose to stay in the army and not go back to the yeshiva. But the problem is that he was a very, very good soldier, very good, and he got into the Sayar Tzachanim, which is within the paratroopers, they have a more elite unit within the paratroopers called Sayar Tzachanim. It's their elite reconnaissance unit. that's very difficult to get into. The tryouts, we'll call them in English tryouts for that, is a 3-day torture chamber that pushes you to your absolute physical and psychological limit. I'm not going to go into it now, but it's like, if you would hear about this, you'd be like, and so the people who can survive that, and they are the best ones, are chosen to be in the Sayar. And he got into that, so you can't be in that and haMizbeach, because a regular paratrooper, from the day he enters the army to the day he is considered fully trained, is 7 months. But in the elite unit, it's 14 months. In other words, they have double the training, double the skills. They learn many more things, much more than a regular soldier. The expectations for them are higher on all the things. So he left the haMizbeach unit, which means that now he's in the army as a from guy in a unit without other from people. There were 1 or 2 other from people, but primarily not religious people, which has all kinds of challenges, because he's a kid that grew up, we live in a small settlement in the West Bank. Everyone there is like us, pretty much. Everyone is religious. We went to religious schools, we went to religious high schools, everyone is like him, and then he went to yeshiva. So suddenly he is in an environment that everyone is, not religious around him, and he has to maneuver. Now, sometimes we see kids, I see kids in Israel, in our yeshuvas and other places, in high school, you see them, and I think, these kids are like ish. They're like a burning flame in like spirituality and learning, and they're this. I see kids like this. Maoz was not like that at all. Maoz was seemingly regular kid. The way I see it now, he was not a burning flame. He was like a Ner Tamid, like a small flame. But the problem with the burning huge flame is that it requires a tremendous amount of maintenance. And the small flame that's burning all the time. So this is a kid who davens 3 times a day, every day. He learns Dai Mikra Tarkin. He learns Mishnayos. He learns small things all the time. He always did that. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. He does everything he's supposed to do all the time, but on a small flame. You don't look at him and say, wow, this guy is a burning flame. No. Small flame, regular kid that does everything you're supposed to do, and makpidah and always. And someone who's like that can be very successful when you suddenly find yourself in an environment like you found yourself in the army, because the burning flame, you take that kid out of yeshiva, out of the laboratory conditions that allow him to be a burning flame, and he suddenly doesn't have all the proper things to keep that flame alive. But someone who's a small flame, he can be in it for the long haul, also in more difficult non-laboratory conditions like he was, in terms of ruchnius, I'm saying. And he did very, very well. Everyone loved him. He had tremendous friends with religious guys, non-religious guys. And he kept up. I was told, this is things I didn't know. I learned this in the shiva from his friends. The people telling me this are his friends who are not religious. So they are, when they're telling me what I'm about to tell you, they are meshiach lefitumo, if you're familiar with that term in the Gemara. It means someone is telling you something, and they're like not connected to the story. They're just like, they don't know anything, and they tell you a thing about it, not realizing even that what they tell you to you is extremely important. So someone like that is more trustworthy, because they don't even know the significance of something. They're telling you how it was. So that's how it was. So they're telling me, in the army they go on these very, very long hikes. Like they train them in that, and they actually really needed that when they were in Asa. But they're walking like tens of kilometers with extremely heavy packs. It's a big part of the training. They're infantry. They have to do that. And for a few hours, they take a little break. They sit down. They let them sit for a few minutes before they continue. She was telling me, we would sit down. Everyone would be like, it's through the night. You start at 6 o'clock in the evening, and you end at 6 o'clock in the morning. And he said, we'd stop, and everyone would be like, it's like trying that. Maoz, and just tell me, Maoz would always have this little book, pull it out of his pocket, and he learned his little book. He would say, read his little book, and then we continue, and he put it on every time, not like one time, every time, throughout the entire army. Everyone remembers that about him. What was the book? A book that he became very connected with, We have a little nice memorial for him connected. This is a book called Mesilat Yesharim by the Ramchal. The book talks about how to improve your midot, which was very important to him. When in the army, in these kinds of units, they would every week they would have a meeting of all the soldiers, and the officers would encourage everyone to criticize, if they felt they needed it, the other soldiers, like what you don't like about him, like all your beefs. You were encouraged to get them all out publicly at this meeting. I think they felt like you get it out now, and then it doesn't come out in other places. Maoz refused to play that game. He refused. He would not do that. He said, if I have a problem with someone, I will speak to them privately. I will not embarrass them in front of everyone. He worked on these things. It wasn't something that no one ever saw Maoz get mad. I did, actually, as a parent. I wouldn't say that. He was a normal kid. But his friends and in the army and in very intense situations all told me, I never saw him mad. I don't think he was one. He worked on these things. These were important things to him. On the 7th of October, he was not in the army. He was home, but not at home. He was home, meaning not in the army on that day, but he wasn't at home because where we live on the Gabbai, it was Torah boring. So he went somewhere with his friends. He took our car, and he was somewhere about an hour away from where we live. And he heard very early in the morning about what was going on, and he understood right away that, like, in the unit that he's in, they're gonna call them. They're gonna call them. So he felt like he had to come home right away, but he called home, and my wife, we also knew very early what was going on, and she answered the phone. It's Shabbos. She answered the phone. When he heard her answer the phone, that gave him the final stamp of approval that what he thought was going on was really going on, and he did the right thing. And then he drove directly to our house because he had stuff in the house that he had to get. I was in shul. I didn't see him. He was home for maybe 7 minutes. My wife prepared what he asked, and he had to get a few things. He prepared it. He was home for 7 minutes, and then he took our car and drove another hour to his base, which is near Netanya. And they got to the base. He parked the car. I had to go get it afterwards. And all the guys came there. They got all their equipment together, and they flew down in helicopters. And by 1:32, they were in Re'im, which is the site of the party. You know what that is. And from then until the day he fell 2 weeks ago, we saw him. He was home once for 72 hours. Now, in Gaza, I don't know what you know about what it's like there, but they don't have electricity or water, so it's hard. They don't shower. They don't have showers. They're not allowed to really take off all of their equipment, except for like one person for 20 minutes, and then they, a day. So like we're talking, he came home for 72 hours, take your shoes off. He has been wearing shoes for 7 weeks straight. We spoke to him his time in Gaza, it was 90-something days. We split up into two. The first 7 weeks, then he was home for 72 hours, then the second 8 weeks. So the first 7 weeks, that entire time, we spoke to him on the phone once. When they had the deal with the kidnapped, they brought back some of the hostages, and so it was a ceasefire. So they didn't take them out of Gaza, but they moved them. They were from their forward positions. He's in the most forward place. They moved them back a little bit to a place that was more protected, and they were able to allow them to have showers and to eat hot food and to have a phone, not their phone, but they gave them phones that they can speak to their parents, to their parents, girlfriends, whatever. And so we spoke to him that one time. Besides that, we spoke to him one other time. We didn't really speak to him. One other time he had an opportunity to send a recorded message. They come and had one of the people that comes in and out with the supplies had a phone, and he let all of them record a WhatsApp recording, and then when he left, he sent it to all of us. So obviously we have a WhatsApp group of all the parents. So they were all getting the recordings, and everyone, all the mothers were like, wow, we spoke to him, he told us this, told us that, told us the other thing. So we get from him an 11-second message, and he said, I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll translate. He said, Mami, Abba, Maoz, Akol Sababa, Zo, Idkanti. Check that off, that's how you understand. He basically says everything is Sababa, which is Israeli slang for everything is fine, everything is great, that's all. you've been notified. Everything is okay. He wasn't a man of many words.
Not a lot of words.
They were in northern Gaza. After they went in the second time, they were in Khan Yunis, where they've been for the last 2 months. What happened to him was, the way it works there is that you capture a house, and then you live in that house that you captured for a day or 2 or 3, whatever they decide based on what's going on, and then you move forward, capture more area, and then you capture another house, and you live in that. The unit lives in the house. In the army, it's called an itur. When they say, if you hear someone talking about this itur, that itur, what they mean is a house that you captured that you're living in, an itur. So they were in that itur for 4 days, and apparently the Hamas terrorists figured out we don't want them to know that they're in the house. There's like camouflaging of it and stuff, but they were on to them. They knew that they were in the house. So they actually had a planned, for them, a very sophisticated planned attack on the house, which started with a grenade being thrown into the house. So that morning, at about 9 o'clock in the morning, a lot of guys were in like the main living room area, getting ready to go out for the day. There's a certain Shigrat Milchama. There's a certain routine even in the war. What I'm saying? Things happen that you don't expect, but there are 100 days, there's a certain routine. So they were all getting ready to go out for the day, and they were drinking coffee and tea, and suddenly a grenade is thrown into the house, and it blows up, and every single person in the room is injured on varying levels of severity. Our son Maoz was not in the room. He was in the neighboring room asleep. Now, I have to say that throughout his life, I struggled with waking him up in the morning. He was always very difficult to wake up. All our children were, but him especially. And usually, you kind of like say, okay, they'll solve this problem in the army. But I was told by friends in the army that even in the army, he had a hard time with this. And he wants to get up, but he just can't. So now I know how to do it. If you throw a grenade in the next room, he'll wake up. And he woke up immediately and came running into the room, and everyone in the room was injured. And they had a paramedic and they had a medic with them in their team, but that they couldn't get to everyone. There was a mass of they call Rav Niska'im, meaning there were many wounded, and just the paramedic and the medic, and it would take about 10 minutes for the doctor. They have doctors there too, but not with them in the house. So he immediately started doing what he needed to do with the wounded. So the paramedics took maybe the more serious ones, and other ones he was dealing with. And I think they were like yelling at him, like, do this, do that, and whatever they told them. He was calming them down. His officer was wounded very seriously, his commander, the officer, and he was had a major artery over here, and there was gushing blood. And he did something that only medics usually know how to do, called tacking, where you take a certain type of gauze and you have to like stuff it in a specific way into the wound to stop the bleeding. And it's something that medics learn to do, but the regular non-medics don't really know how to do it. He did that, he did it perfectly, and he saved his life. In other words, he's in Enkarim still, and he's not, he has a long haul ahead of him, but he's going to live. If he didn't do that, Maoz didn't do that, he would have bled out, 100%. He saved his life. And then he went to other wounded and helped them. In addition to their team, they had a group of unit called Okek that was staying in the same itur. You all know what that is, right? Itur is the house. And these are guys that they didn't know very well. These are guys that he knew only a few days. The Okets are the guys that are dog handlers. They're dog handlers, and the Israeli army now uses dogs all the time. There's 2 types of dogs. There's attack dogs and there's bomb-sniffing dogs. So before you go into a house, you might send the dog in to sniff out if there's a bomb in there, if there's a booby trap. So they're very crucial. So they're like with them. So they've only with them a few days, so they didn't know them very well. And their commander was injured, and he was very, very, very nervous because he felt on his back like wet, like on his back, and he thought it was a serious wound that was all blood. So Maoz ripped off all of his clothes looking for the wound, and he saw that he got shrapnel to the shlucker. Shlucker is like this. It's like this pack with water that you put in your backpack, and it has like a straw thing that you can have water. So it punctured the shlucker, and he got all water, and then he calmed him down that it's just water, and he was hurt on his feet, but only lightly. When we were, I didn't get to how Maoz was injured yet, but later Maoz would be injured, and when he was in the hospital in the ICU unconscious, that soldier came down to his room. He was upstairs, a different floor, and it was very moving. He came into his room and he held his hand and he was crying and he said, "Thank you so much for caring for me and taking care of me." And he calmed him down, and then they had to evacuate the wounded. In other words, they had to get them from where they are. I think they were like on the second floor. They have something called an achsari, which is like an armored personnel carrier, and inside they have doctors and like an ambulance and all the medical stuff. And that they have to get them into the achsari, and then the achsari takes them to the helicopter, and then they can get to the hospital. So in the achsari they have doctors and stuff. We have to get them from there to there. Now, what I didn't mention is that when all this is going on and they're dealing with the wounded, there's a whole battle going on because it was an organized attack on the house. That the grenade was just an opening to, so there's shooting and there's a whole like fighting going on. So when they go downstairs to bring them into the Achsari, that's under fire. And we spoke to, in the Shiva, somebody that was wasn't in that, he was on a rooftop not too far away, and he watched the whole thing unfold in front of him, and he told us, I would see Maoz come down, the wounded guy, like some of them on stretchers, some of them he was carrying, he got them in Achsari, he'd go up and down, up and down, up and down, till they got all the wounded packed away. And once that happened, he ran to his mag. His weapon was what's called a mag. A mag is a very heavy, very big gun that gives cover fire. It's not a precision thing, but it's, it's like, Rambo? Rambo?
Yeah.
That's a mag. It's very heavy, and throughout his entire army service, he was a magist. He was in charge of the mag. Now, nobody wants to carry the mag because it's really heavy. Really heavy, and when I say about all those heavy long marches that they have to do, so they're all carrying this like dinky little M16. He has to, the mag is like this. He has to carry the mag and the ammunition for the mag. It's very, very heavy, so you have to be very strong to carry the mag. In his year and 2 months of training, of all the people who were supposed to be carrying the mag, I think 7 or 8 of them, he's the only one who started with the mag and ended his mag. Everyone else found a way to get out of it. It's really hard, and he stuck with it. And he was not happy about getting the mag. He wanted something else. He wanted a different, because everybody has a special weapon that they're in charge of. But because the mag, but he owned it. He owned it, and he became identified with the mag. And in fact, to the point where his nickname in the army, his friends called him not. Instead of Maoz, they called him Magos. So he runs to his mag, and he goes up to the roof. He's fine on the roof is Mifakeda Abdud, the commander of the whole Sayeret Tzanchanim. Okay, it's a fairly high officer in those conditions, and he's up there commanding like all the forces because there's a whole battle going on underneath. And he has his like kashar, the guy who's in charge of his communications. So his kashar is standing there like shooting with an M16 at the terrorists on the bottom. And I heard this from that guy's parents who came to our shiva, and they spoke with him on the next day, and he described it the following way. This is how he described to his parents, who then related it to me. He said, "We're in the middle of this, we're shooting, the whole thing's going on, and Maoz shows up with a smile." That's what he said, with his mag. And Maoz says to him, like, step away with your toy gun. Because, like, the M16 is like, it's nothing compared to the mag. Let me handle this with my mag. Like, you have like a toy gun there. So he steps back and he comes forward with his mag and he starts giving very serious cover fire, and the terrorists forced to go into a building. It's all very close. Like distance from me to you is a distance. Like you can jump almost from the roof. So it's all very, very close. He's giving cover fire with the mag, and he traps these 2 terrorists. There were other terrorists, later, but these 2 terrorists were trapped in the house because of Maoz's cover fire. They can't go anywhere. Anywhere they go, they're going to get hit. So they bring up a tank, and the tank shoots the house, and the house topples on top of them and kills them, but a piece of the house flies off into his eye and into his brain. Oh. And 38 minutes later, they told me this is the fastest in the entire war. 38 minutes later, he's in Soroka Hospital in Beersheba. So Varda, my wife and I are home. About 12 o'clock, 12:30, I'm not sure the exact time, we get a phone call. My wife gets the phone call. And they tell her your son has been seriously injured. In 10 minutes, we're going to have a team at your house to bring you to him at the hospital in Beersheba. We live about an hour and a half away from him. And that's all we know. Now, when someone says Patsua Kasher, injured seriously, there's a range, right? There's a very large range of what that means. So we had no idea. We didn't know where in his body he was injured. We didn't know anything. So we had this hour and a half ride. And the people that are picking up, the army people, they don't know anything either. Like, I think intentionally, like they really don't know. So we know nothing. An hour and a half later, we get to the hospital, they whisk us and we want you to see him right away. So they whisk us into the ICU and we see him lying there in ICU connected to all the ICU stuff. We still don't know anything. Like, you look at him, you can't know what's the situation. And then the doctor brings us into his office and he sits us down. He tells us very sensitively but very clearly that, he's Patsua Anush, which means terminal. He has a huge piece of shrapnel lodged in his brain that did a lot of damage, has irreversible brain damage, and it's not operative. You can't touch it because it's impossible to operate on, and that's it. And we're like, how long does he have? Like, what are we talking here? And they're like, hours or maybe a few days. My wife, who's a fan of Grey's Anatomy, is like, well, you don't have somebody that do some exploratory thing that only he will do, and he's like, no. So we walk out of the room. Obviously, we're very, very busy, and there's a function in the Army called Sinat Yisrael. In other words, this is the person who's in charge of liaising between the Army unit and families of wounded soldiers. Okay, and she now is accompanying us this whole time, also now. So her name is Lee. And Lee says to us, look, I've been doing this for 10 years. I have a lot of experience, and I have to tell you something. You might not realize it now, but you've been given a gift. Because most parents get a knock on their door. If your child is wounded, they call you so you can get there. But if it's killed, they do not call you. They knock on your door and they personally come and tell you. They never will do it by phone. So most parents get a knock on the door, they find out that their child has fallen, and the next day they have a funeral. And they don't have an opportunity to depart with them, to say goodbye. So you were given a gift. You can part with it. And we heard that then, and it's 100% true. And since then, I've spoken to many parents of fallen soldiers, and they all wish they were able to part. It is something that remains like for people. So that's how we understood. Okay, so we're waiting, and that's what we're doing now in the hospital. We're partying. So we started, ourselves partying, and then all his friends gave them the opportunity. So his close friends from the neighborhood that we live in, from our community, from his high school, from his yeshiva, and the rebbes, all the people in his life are like streaming into the hospital to part with him. And ICU, you're only allowed 2 people in the room. It's all, but everyone knew room 7. Oh, room 7. Okay, whatever you want. Moshe Shabbos, his friends in the army. Moshe Shabbos, they were home. They were able to come. We had like 30 people in his ICU room. Like it was. We were running like almost like a mini shiva in the hospital. Come to Sunday night, sit down with the doctor, and he said, I have to tell you, I didn't think you'd still be here now when I spoke to you yesterday. The situation is stable. It hasn't changed. It hasn't progressed towards brain damage like we thought. And we had thought that we had seen the worst, only to discover that there's a worse than that. Because now we're potentially looking at weeks, months, years in this situation of just being unconscious. So then we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to organize our life. My wife is very organized, and she likes to plan. And like we had all of our kids there. We have married children. They were there, without their wives and family. They have jobs, and we didn't. Do we send everyone home, back to their life? Do we stay here? We didn't know. And Rav Udi Rat is a Rav who, whatever, I'll explain about him. And he suggested, maybe you should do like a tefillah of your family. Don't call it a goodbye thing. don't see it that way. Like, just have your whole family come together, and then if people go home and then something happens, they'll know that they had that. And one other important thing to mention is that his unit, who had been in Gaza for 8 months, were all along planned to get out. He was injured on Thursday. All along, they're planned to get out on Sunday. And you know, on Sunday they're getting out, and usually when they get out of Gaza, they don't just send it home. You have one day they get out of Gaza, one day on the base where they do all kinds of decompressing, psychological stuff to make sure everyone's okay, and then the next day you can go home until you have to come back. And so that was on Sunday, and on Monday at about 3 o'clock, his guys, his team, who he's been with for 2 years, who had been almost 100 days fighting together in Gaza, they didn't go home. They all got a bus together, and they brought them to the hospital, and they all came to visit him. And also other guys that were less seriously wounded. But they all came in, and like everybody who came to visit them when they got there, I explained to them the situation, because people knew that he was seriously injured, but there's a huge gap between seriously injured and no hope whatsoever. So I explained that to them, and I told them you have to part with him. And so that was very hard to hear, but they were there, and I felt like they were the last. Everyone else we parted with him. So that same day, on Monday in the evening, we got our family all together, all the siblings, and six kids. We had 5 boys and a girl. And we were in the room with him, and we were like, singing with him, and we didn't know what would be or how long things would take. And as we're sitting in the room with him, we suddenly see all the numbers on the ICU board going crazy. And they're just like going down. They're just like falling. The numbers like crazy. And we're like, what is going on? And we all like look at each other, and we all just, the whole family, it was only us. We're all like, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And as we finished, the numbers flatline, and the nurse comes running in, and I look at her like, so, that's it. That's a shortened version. I'm not going to give you